Here's actually one of the panels right there. So this is a lot. This is like one of the most popular pages in the book for, well, you can imagine, chat. But I mean, even then, it's like just having her stand there. I mean, you even have like one of the second to last panel, like it's like the light is not on her except her ass. But yes, my friends, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna move on to the next part of my show today, and that is my review, chat, for Comic Book Corner. Again, for people that don't know, Comic Book Corner is a show in which I review either a single issue comic or a graphic novel. Hell, maybe even manga, chat. I mean, I might get to manga one day. But for today, I'm going to be doing a review for The Rocketeer, The Complete Adventures by Dave Stevens. And also, thank you to Chris Ayers for suggesting this, and thank you to everyone on the Patreon for your other suggestions and also for voting for this to be the big winner this week. And for those that need a bit of a background, a little history, a little synopsis of The Rocketeer, original was published back in 1982, and the original comic series was the creation of artist and on-again, off-again writer Dave Stevens. An homage of, action-adventure serials of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. The book follows stunt pilot Cliff Secord, who obtains an experimental rocket pack in which he first intends to enrich himself and his friends and family members, but later finds himself embroiled in several adventures involving Nazi spies, gangsters, and even crazy circus people. There are several editions of the Complete Adventures that you can buy, and I read the one that features the reworked art and colors by Stevens. Now, before jumping into the book itself, I want to talk about, the history of The Rocketeer, its adaptations, sequels, and also my own experiences with the character and the books. Now, the creator of the series, as I mentioned, Dave Stevens, he had like a pretty interesting career, in my opinion. He primarily worked as a freelance artist and animator throughout his life. I mean, he did everything. He did fill-in work on numerous comics like Star Wars back in the day. He did many storyboards and animations for Hanna-Barbera cartoons. I mean, everything from Super Friends to the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla. And he even did concept art and storyboards for Raiders of the Lost Ark at the request of Steven Spielberg, who was a fan of his work. And so he was around. He was a part of the industry, chat, all facets of it. I mean, from comics to animation to even huge film productions like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones. And his work obviously is influenced by pulp comics. And Art Deco architecture. You can see that throughout all of his artwork for The Rocketeer and many other things that he's worked on. And he was also very well known for drawing women with what I would describe as very healthy curves, or, huge breasts and big asses. That's what he was known for, chat. Very similar to the pinup girls of the 30s and 40s and 50s. He would reference many of them, chat. He also influenced numerous other artists. The most famous of which is Bruce Timm, who went on to create, Batman the Animated Series and the rest of the DC AU. I mean, what we got to learn, chat, is like artists are horny. Animators are horny. Artists are horny, chat. You can just see with all how they draw certain proportions of a variety of forms, not just the female form, but even the male form. And that is very much on display in Dave Stevens' artwork, especially in the Rocketeer. Now, The Rocketeer was originally just a backup story for another comic that was being published by Pacific Comics in the early 1980s, a individual, independent publisher. The first two chapters, apparently, of The Rocketeer were immensely popular, incredibly popular. And he was actually asked by the publishers to do a monthly Rocketeer series. But initially, he didn't want to, since he enjoyed his freelance work and he didn't like being tied down to just one specific project. He loved jumping between different things because it kept, it kept it fresh, kept his ideas fresh. He was always doing something new. And I can kind of get that. Also, and he went on to say that he didn't have much confidence in his own writing abilities. Like, he was very much an artist first and a writer second. And that's something I actually want to comment on later on in this review and talking about his writing. There was numerous issues with the publication of the initial series. Numerous long delays between issues, a lawsuit from Marvel over the Rocketeer name. There previously was another, I think, group in a Marvel comic called the Rocketeers, right? And they ended up suing Pacific Comics at the time. And also, you just had the shuttering of Pacific Comics as well, and a lot of those assets being absorbed by different companies. Eventually, the story was published, and there was a handful of short sequels that are actually included in this edition that I read, The Complete Adventures. Since those stories, the Rocketeer character bounced between numerous other publishers. There's a long history chat, like on the Wikipedia, which you can just read and all about that. But right now, the Rocketeer is currently being used by IDW Publishing. I believe that Dave Stevens' estate gave them the license to use for right now, and you can see the character being featured in some of their books. Now, in terms of my own experience, I've read bits and pieces of some of the original comic over the years, just seeing like a panel online or like a splash page, something like that. But my true exposure to the Rocketeer was through the original Disney movie released in the 1990s. It was directed by, Joe Johnston and starred a number of recognizable actors: Billy Campbell, Jennifer Connelly, Alan Arkin, Paul Sorvino, and other recognizable faces. It was critically very successful, critically. And, for me, I always thought the movie was like a really family-friendly Indiana Jones. It was this kind of just wholesome adventure movie set in the late 1930s, 1938, pre-war America. I thought it had some great ideas in it. Maybe for me, not everything was all well executed, but at the same time, I can definitely see why, so many people love this film. And I do like it. I do enjoy the movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember liking it at the time. Sadly, it was a box office bomb, but it's gone on to be a cult classic, and it's remained in the pop culture zeitgeist since that time. That was also during the period of time when you had all these studios after the success of Batman in 1989. You had a lot of people just trying to make as many comic book movies as they possibly could. And you had a lot of commercial failures, and critical successes possibly, but commercial failures. And sadly, that seemed to be the case with the Rock. You also had other kind of like pulp characters too, like the Shadow. They tried to do the Shadow of Alec Baldwin. You had a couple other ones chat, and those didn't kind of work out. Now, and actually, before we go ahead and jump into the review, I actually wanted to show you guys the trailer. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Rocketeer movie, or at the very least the trailer. So I actually have that prepared for you right now. Let's go ahead and take a look at the trailer, chat. There's a lot from the book that was obviously incorporated into the movie itself. And I want to actually touch on certain things, both what they eventually incorporate into the movie, but also what they chose not to incorporate. I think it's very interesting. So let's go ahead and watch this trailer, chat, for The Rocketeer, 1991. So like I said, it's a fun movie. It's a fun movie. Again, I don't think everything in it's like absolutely like well executed. There are dated aspects to it. I mean, some of that blue screen stuff is just like, the flying sequences. They do some stunt work, which I think is some of the best parts of the action sequences, but then the other parts is like, it doesn't look so good. They gave it a lot of money though. It had like a $30+ million budget or something like that. I mean, Disney spent some money on this. But it kind of never achieved that like mainstream level of success. It has a very passionate cult fan base, to this day. A lot of people like this. I think because of this movie, a lot of people said Joe Johnston should direct an Indiana Jones movie, right? And you could kind of see why the Disney brought back Joe Johnston to direct something like Captain America, which kind of has a lot of the same sensibilities as the Rocketeer movie. Certainly aesthetically, there's no question about that. But I just wanted to show that to you guys because, I don't know if how many people have actually seen The Rocketeer, especially, in this era, especially the last 20 years of the types of comic book movies that we've gotten. It kind of might be one of those kind of forgotten films in the mainstream, but certainly maintains a very passionate cult fan base. But, going into the book itself right now, like going into this book, the things that I usually think of when it comes to The Rocketeer is the artwork of the comic and the pulpy, swashbuckling sensibilities of the movie. Those are those two things. Reading this all the way through for the first time, I very quickly realized that the movie only actually took the aesthetics of the work, in my opinion, and departed to a degree from some of the aspects of the first story. Most definitely when it came to, the characters. First of all, again, the artwork is absolutely gorgeous throughout this graphic novel. Everything from the Art Deco backgrounds to the character designs are just superb. There's a lot of detail in these panels. The paneling placement, I have to say, though, just as a note, it's a little confusing. It's a little overwhelming at first because there's just so much detail like on these pages, and I think maybe some of the word balloons and thought bubbles might be a little ill-placed, and so it's kind of like, oh shit, there's a lot I got to consume right here. But still, the artwork itself is great, and just the rich tapestry of colors. It's just you're gonna enjoy just looking at this thing, the entire time, whether or not you're into the story or the dialogue. And actually, kind of show you a little bit of the artwork itself. Also kind of show off Dave Stevens, the way in which he liked to draw women. show off his tastes, if you will. Here's actually one of the panels right there. So this is a lot. This is like one of the most popular pages in the book for, well, you can imagine, chap. But I mean, even then, it's like just having her stand there. I mean, you even have like one of the second to last panel, like, it's like the light is not on her except her ass. And so anytime like this character of Betty, who we're going to talk about in greater detail in just a bit, this is how she's drawn. That's pretty much like her go-to pose. Just, one hand on her hip, bust sticking out, ass sticking out, and the lighting just hitting only certain body parts. But you also get a sense of the rest of the work, obviously showing off the 1930s aesthetics, everything from the cars themselves, the clothes that a lot of these characters are obviously wearing. But this is the type of artwork that is featured throughout the book, and also the way in which he draws women like this. That's featured throughout the book as well. Obviously. But Chad, I have to say, even though I think that the artwork is fantastic and the character designs, Art Deco, guys, you guys know I love Art Deco architecture. I mean, Bruce Timm, Batman Made series, of course, and just the use of colors I think is so good. They touched it up for this specific release of this version. It's great. And that's part of the reason why I'm a little sad to say that despite being really enamored with the artwork, I really didn't care for the stories and the characters themselves all that much. And it's funny because I go back and because doing my research after, because I wanted to read through the book just cold. I already had my knowledge that I had, obviously, from the little bits and pieces I've read over the years. And, seeing the movie. So I was like, okay, I got to get like a sense of the story, so far, or at least of what they adapted. And even though they made numerous changes, I didn't want to go in reading everything else. I wanted to read about it afterwards. And, hearing and reading about how Dave Stevens, where he's like, I'm an artist first and a writer second, and he never had a lot of confidence in his writing abilities. I'm like, I can kind of see why, because a lot of his storytelling, I think, is just super simplified. And it might be just because, like, hey, this is a pulp, comic book, where the storylines themselves were pretty straightforward. You had the hero, he had the dame, had the girl, had to rescue the damsel in distress and fight off a couple of, Nazis against us, whoever else, those lint lickers, if you will. And that's pretty much what we get here. But I don't know, I was kind of surprised at how rude and unappealing like the main character was in this actual book, Chad. The character of Cliff Secord, which is, I mean, a great name. Great, perfect name for a comic book character. Certainly one from, the 1930s, late 1930s. But kind of unlike his film counterpart, which they definitely softened for the Disney movie. There's no doubt about that. They made it more family friendly. Like, this book is, it's again, it's a lot more violent. It's a lot more pulpy. Obviously, you guys can see that Mr. Stevens has no problem showing off the female form, the feminine form, chat, in all of its curvaceous glory. There's no doubt. But the thing that really did leave me wanting was the characters. Like Cliff Secord, when we're first introduced to him in the work, even before he becomes the Rocketeer, when he dons the mantle of the Rocketeer, he's a pretty rude, selfish, and controlling person. He's this like stunt pilot, works for this show. He's good at his job at the very least, but when it comes to like maintaining human relationships, he's incredibly flawed. He's very controlling over his girlfriend, Betty, who wants to be a model and an actress. And I'm thinking, well, at first I think that's fine. But, usually when you read a book or a comic or something or watch a movie, like, your character starts out one way and eventually they're going to have a character arc. They're going to change, throughout, and maybe he won't be so rude, and won't be so selfish, won't be so controlling. And he kind of doesn't change at all, which was an interesting choice to do that. It's like, hey man, he's flawed through and through. He's going to remain flawed through and through. But he doesn't really learn a lesson in this book, in my opinion. And I found that kind of unappealing about him. Like, it was just fine. Like, it starts out with him like finding this technology, basically. After this experimental rocket, which is designed by, a certain industrialist of the age. You can guess who, obviously. It's kind of a big twist in the book, but if you can think of a certain industrialist who loved flying planes in the 30s and 40s and 50s, you can probably, surmise who that person is who created the rocket itself. But, he finds this thing, and he's like, well, I want to exploit this as much as possible and make some money from it, so, I can satisfy that girl of mine, Betty. Control her feminine wiles and stuff, right? And so, that's the whole thing, but an accident happens, which requires him to be heroic, and people then start thinking of him almost like as a hero. But even though he's through and through is not a hero, he doesn't really want to be a hero at all, Honestly, throughout a lot of the book, he actually is portrayed to be quite cowardly. When certain things don't involve his interest. And there's even like a moment in this book where I was like, all right, fuck you, man, where it's like halfway through the initial story, which is about 5 chapters, I want to say. And there's all different parties involved that want this experimental rocket. Like, you have the FBI, you have Nazi spies that want it, you have another third party that wants it. And for like this specific, like, he gets captured a lot in this story. He gets captured one time, and the bad guys basically want to know, like, all right, where is your friend, whose name is Peavy? He's probably like the only friend that he actually has, who's like this inventor and helped create the Rocketeer persona. They want to know where his address was, and he gives them the wrong address, or on purpose, but he gives them the address of his girlfriend. And it's like, man, if they, again, something happens in that scene, but it's like, you could have like got her killed in the book. And like I thought like, well, he's going to probably feel like really guilty about that. He's going to try to explain himself. But then there's a point in the book where it gets back to him that, the guy's found his girlfriend in a very, interesting scenario. Let's just say like her big old boobies hanging out. I mean, that's what it is. Of course, Chad's Betty. So her big old boobies were hanging out and her big old ass was sticking out. And, the guys were like, whoa. But then it gets back to him later on that's what they saw. And he just starts laughing his ass off. But I'm like, man, you could have gotten your girlfriend killed. Like, you have Nazi spies chasing after you that are murdering people. It's like, so that was kind of, I don't know. It's like, it kind of turned me off to him as a character, honestly. And I didn't like that. I didn't care for that at all. And he doesn't really change throughout the rest of the story. He gets involved in different scenarios, like after the initial one, dealing with the Rocketeer technology. And we'll get to some of those other stories. and like one where he tries to get Betty back again, and that doesn't work very well. And then there's a whole other one where he ends up trying to solve a murder mystery with a guy that's clearly supposed to be the Shadow, but they can't say it's the Shadow because they don't have the rights. And it takes place at a circus, and he doesn't really change at all. And so I don't know. I kind of was turned off by him. I think like his whole look, the design of the Rocketeer is excellent. Like just that suit and the helmet, like it's it's very much that it's that golden age idea for a superhero. I like the flight pants with the flared out hips and everything. I like the jetpack. Like aesthetically, artistically, love the design. But it's the character himself that I just didn't really find all that appealing. There wasn't a lot of depth to him. I think that's the issue with this book. It's like, I totally get it why comic fans love this because of the artwork. It's an homage to the golden age of comics, to pulp comics, to Art Deco architecture. You can see how someone like Bruce Timm loved something like this and wanted to incorporate that into his own work, and he eventually did into something like Batman the Animated Series and the rest of the DCU. But then, unlike the Rocketeer, he also, along with everything else that he loved, the way in which he drawed women, the way in which he drawed all his characters, a lot of broad shoulders, kind of thin waist, if you will. But he also, him and his various writers like Paul Dini, everyone else that worked on those shows, Dwayne McDuffie, they included a lot of depth and characterization. They had arcs and they told great stories. In this one, I just don't feel like there's a great story being told of these people. Eventually we get to, outside of Cliff Secord, we do get to Betty, right? The on-again, off-again girlfriend of Cliff Secord. And she's actually based off of a real-life pinup girl and model, Betty Page, that Stevens actually knew and referenced in his work constantly and had some sort of relationship with. And listen, I'll tell you right now, Betty is gorgeous. I don't care. I'm not a prude at all. It's when I see this artwork in the comics, oh my God, it's look at that spread right there. It looks great. There's no question about that. I like her design. All right. I'm not gonna care oh, how can you draw him? No, I'd like seeing that. That's nice. But outside of just being gorgeous, she doesn't really get a lot of development either. She's there to be eye candy. And again, like I said, don't believe me. I don't mind that. I absolutely love the way she's actually drawn. And her curves are incredible. But so much of her story is just about her body, honestly. It's actually used as a plot device throughout the rest of the series, where she's being manipulated by certain men, by certain individuals who are exploiting her looks and her curves. I mean, it's a moment, as I brought up earlier, chat, where Cliff Secord throws off the bad guys by sending them to her apartment where they see her big old boobies and her big old ass stick. I mean, that's a plot point in the thing, and they do that a lot with her in the book. And she's not portrayed as a ditz, at all. She's not dumb. So I do appreciate that, because she could have just been a big boob bimbo. He could have went in that direction. And thankfully she does come across as intelligent and kind of confident, in her abilities, in her body, of her own intelligence, and she wants to be independent, obviously too, but she can't help herself because she still likes Cliff Secord, even though he's a big jerk. I just want to give him a punch in the chin. But so much of her story is just, it's kind of inconsequential to the main story itself, to the Rocketeer. She's just there to look great, and she does look great. There's no doubt about that. But I was disappointed that they didn't do more with her, and she was kind of the only one, I have to say, that has a bit of an arc, where, she realizes kind of what's actually going on, and she chooses to do something specific at the end. Even though I don't know if that would have been, that's the best thing for her to do, though. Which, I don't want to spoil it for people that obviously want to read it. But I was I don't know if that was the right decision. I mean, it's great to have her still be around, but I was I don't know if this is going to work. And then the other characters, there's a lot of other characters in this book, but again, they're kind of, they're secondary, they're tertiary to the events of the story, in my opinion. You also get Peavy, what the hell of a name, chap, who's pretty much this old man inventor. You know, he's pretty much the only friend to Cliff Secord in the book. With him, he's kind of weird because his whole storyline is him constantly just going back and forth about the Rocketeer idea. It's like, oh, well, making a lot of money if this would be cool, but we got to deal with all these bad guys all the time. He's like, you should stop doing it, and you should keep doing it. You should stop doing it, you should keep doing it. And he's just going, I'm getting whiplash when it comes to Peavy. He's like, Peavy, what do you want? What do you want? Which, you know, in this case, it's whatever Stevens wants the character to say at any given moment. And so it's like, even though I like his personality, I like his rapport with someone like Betty. You know, he's actually a much kinder man in her life. Probably the only kind man in her life. Because all the other men are kind of scum, except for the guy that's the Shadow. There's another character introduced in the last story, which I want to get to, who is clearly an homage to the Shadow. But they can't have him like in his full outfit, but he has like the same, like, remember the Shadow? You see the picture Shadow, like his long nose. Like this character has like a very especially long nose. It's like, okay, this is clearly who you're referencing. So he's actually a positive character, a male character in the book, I would say. But Peavy, you know, again, other than him going back and forth, you know, you should be the Rocketeer, you shouldn't be the Rocketeer anymore. You know, I do like his relationship with Betty. He's very fatherly, you know, what you would expect, obviously. But at the end of the day, we never really get to know them all that much. They're kind of, a lot of the other characters that we meet, they're just kind of like, you know, weird guest stars, you know, in these adventures, and they're just kind of in and out. We don't really see them again, right? Also, this specific collection, it has 3 separate, very distinct stories. The best of which, thankfully, is the first one, which is pretty much, it's the origins and it's the creation of the Rocketeer, getting the technology, using it, exploiting it, being chased by all these different parties, Nazi spies, the FBI, another third party I don't want to mention. You know, that story I think is definitely the best one. That's the one where I feel like, you know, Cliff is acting the most heroic to a degree, obviously. And then like the next story, it's more of a shorter story. And that's where Cliff is just trying to win Betty back, because he's like, I'm just going to go away to Europe and try to get my career going there. And, you know, that kind of plays out how you'd expect. And honestly, I think the weirdest story, and also I feel like it's the worst story in the collection, which it's an investigation into these serial killings at a carnival. And it's where this guy who's clearly meant to be the Shadow enlists the help of the Rocketeer to help him on this case to try to solve, okay, who is killing all these people at this carnival, like all the members of the circus, and, you know, is it like they're investigating all the quote unquote freaks in it, you know, and eventually that's resolved. But it's just kind of weird that we went from, oh yeah, we stole this experimental piece of technology and we're fighting like the Nazis and everything. It's like, okay, that's kind of cool. I get that. You know, it makes sense for, you know, late 1930s. But then it was like, hey, we're going to do a carny story next where we're trying to solve this murder of all these carnies. It's like, okay. This was like kind of got a little whiplash there. But again, even in all these storylines, like the page I showed you here, this specific page is from the second one where Cliff is trying to get, you know, Betty back. You can understand why he's trying to get her back, Jay. I mean, come on, look at her. That's like from the middle chapters. But even in that one, in the first one, and obviously the last one, like the artwork is just incredible. I mean, when we do get to the carnival section, and you can just imagine how just colorful you can get with all that. I mean, the color palette, it's so expansive. Everything, the reds, yellows, blues, and greens and stuff. I mean, it's pretty spectacular, to look at. It's just the mystery itself I didn't find particularly interesting. The characters I didn't find particularly interesting in that story. Again, the artwork is absolutely tremendous, and it's easy to see how this work inspired so many artists for decades. But I honestly, I found the writing to be kind of half-baked and listless at times. Like, I don't even know where we're going with this, even where we ended up. I was like, oh, we just kind of ended up where we were at the book starts in a specific location, and by the end of all these stories, we're exactly where we first started. I was like, okay. There's good ideas, I think, for each character, but I can't say that anyone has like an actual character arc, maybe with the exception of Betty. Maybe. Even then, I'm kind of stretching that. Possibly, you know, I wanna actually check out the other, because there are other Rocketeer storylines that are not written by Dave Stevens. Because the character's currently being used by IDW Publishing. He's hanging out with, you know, characters like the Spirit and all those guys. And so I am curious to check out, you know, some of those and to see if the writing's a little different, if the characters do have some semblance of arcs, right? But, you know, again, for this particular book, like its stories, I did kind of find them a little unsatisfying. However, the artwork, if you just want to get this book just for the artwork and just see these beautiful pages, right? And you're like really into like pulp comics and like the golden age, like the golden era, I should say, of comic books, then you might really enjoy something like that. Because even the golden era, like the storylines, I mean, it could be just him paying homage to that kind of stuff where it's super straightforward, super, you know, kind of like, you know, generic action adventure storylines where the characters don't really learn anything. It's just like, you know, we just go from point A to point B to point C. You save the damsel in distress. You save the broad. You give it a good old kiss on the cheek, hopefully the lips, and you beat up the bad guy, punch him in the jaw like Adolf Hitler. It's like that's what this story is, you know. And if you go down that mindset, then I think you might really like it. On top of already the fantastic artwork, but if you're hoping for an homage to the golden age, but with storytelling that feels almost like a little more modern, or certainly at this period, like the 80s, you know, where the comic book medium was going through a renaissance thanks to another works that certainly did come after, you know, this particular book, but still they're dealing with more darker storylines like in Batman and in Spider-Man and things. Then you might be left wanting. To be perfectly honest. So yeah, there's a lot I like about this stuff. There's a lot of ideas that I appreciate. But it's just that the main stories I didn't particularly care for, and I think the characters are underwritten. It's my kind of first of the things that I've reviewed so far in Comic Book Corner. It's the one that I'm you know, leaving feeling a little mixed, which is sad because, you know, for years the Rocketeer has been lauded and praised by so many comic book fans, and so I was thinking like, oh, I'm finally gonna totally understand. Like I'm gonna read this and I'll be like, oh shit, I'll be just like everybody else, and I kind of didn't. I was kind of left. Maybe I built it. Maybe after all the hype, I built it up for myself to a degree. I'm actually kind of curious, but at the same time, I was like, nah, some of these characters just didn't really do it for me. You know, some of the storytelling didn't do it for me, despite the artwork just being absolutely gorgeous. But that's just kind of how I feel about the Rocketeers. I'm sorry if this might disappoint some people, but there's a lot to definitely appreciate about this, and I do understand its popularity. I totally get it. And obviously I'm very grateful and very thankful that David Stevens impacted so many other people. I mean, you can make an argument that without Dave Stevens and his work on the Rocketeer, we wouldn't have gotten Bruce Timm. We wouldn't have gotten something like Batman the Animated Series in the DCAU. You know, it's kind of like these humble, very early origins. And so in that case, that's awesome. I really appreciate it for that. But I'm more mixed on it, but excellent artwork. Well, what about you, chat? How do you guys feel about the Rocketeer? I'm actually like really curious. Do you love it as much as seemingly everyone else does? Do you love the artwork and the stories? Or are you kind of more like me, where you're a little more mixed on it, where you love the art, it's spectacular, but you didn't care for the stories themselves. You weren't really the biggest fan of the characters. Let me know.